Hey, good evening, everybody. I appreciate that this is a dangerous time because I gather the free drinks start in about 21 minutes. So I'll try and keep this as brief as possible. Martin made the introduction, and by the way, thanks to Martin and Sharon for this amazing coordination and organization today, to maybe be a little bit more provocative. Some people in the audience, well, actually about 25% of the audience, have probably heard me speak, or at least heard my words of lacking wisdom on lighting. And as a veteran for a number of years in this industry, I'm becoming increasingly skeptical, maybe even cynical, about whether or not we're changing fast enough. I have a variety of clients. As some of you know, I run my own little consulting business. And one of the things that we look at with all of the clients is, can they evolve rapidly enough to make the changes which are needed in the industry? And it's about those changes, very briefly today, that I'd like to talk. The first thing that most companies tell me is, it's too complex. You're making this too difficult. We don't understand. And I thought, trawling, of course, the vast resources that Google has on offer, to think about things which seem possibly complex or not so. I love you. What a sentence to come out with. I love you. What's this got to do with lighting? Everything and nothing. Quick show of hands, and I'm sorry for the people online, but who is in love with lighting here? Yeah, don't all move at once. I knew it was a problem doing it at this time in the afternoon. So I think roughly for the people, as it were, at home, that would be about 50% of the people confess to feeling something emotional about light. But the complexities are actually not really anywhere near as difficult as people would paint them to be. Complexity is everywhere. Luckily, in the design and the development world, we don't have to worry about that, because a lot of the complexities at a manufacturing level, at a design level, those are already given. Over the last 10 years, this industry has evolved massively to the point that so many components, so many elements of actually what would constitute good lighting are already around. That's not to say there isn't innovation, that's not to say there isn't evolution. But one of the interesting trends which I've noticed over the last 5 years is an inverse of the complexity equation. People are dumping simplicity, even if they happen to use it in a couple of their brands and taglines. People are dumping the simpleness of good light and actually replacing it with even thicker and thicker catalogs. I actually had an argument with a not client about a year and a half ago that said, for every page in the catalog, we as a manufacturer can sell X thousand pounds of lighting. So if we make the catalog 100 pages bigger, our revenue will go up. Yeah, No names about the manufacturer, but it was an interesting calculation. Unfortunately, it appears to be that their revenue development had a minus in front of it, not a plus, because as the catalog grew, the complexity of working with them also grew. So if we say, what's special about lighting today, there's a sentence, I travel quite a lot, there's a sentence which every flight attendant says to the people when they open the door, they get to the new airport, 132, 6'2", and no specials. And the first thing then that designers tell me is, well, of course we're special. We're totally different. Well, we're all special in our own different way, but equally what we're trying to do, which is deliver light into the right environment, delivering light is intrinsically interesting. What's special about us? Well, is lighting complex? Who thinks lighting's complicated here? It's not a trick question. For the straw poll there, this was a clear Remain vote. That was roughly 10% on complexity, 90% on not really that complex. Actually, delivering light is one of the simplest things. It happens naturally. How we get there, all of the complex engineering around that, that's fun, that's good stuff. That keeps the design process busy, that keeps the development process busy. But actually, we need to be taking away some of the mystery, because if we think about some of the other industrial participants, and I'll get on to who they may be in a little while, this is why it's actually getting really fun at the moment. We know that we can achieve amazing results with good lighting. We know that we can astonish people. If you have anybody here been to PLTC? Yeah? We spend 3 days glorifying the amazing things that can happen with light, with design, and this is fantastic. It's inspirational. Light brings our spaces to life. It generates enthusiasm, it generates excitement, it creates a safe place to live or to work or to move. But at the same time, we also need to be really, really clear that the people selling chairs and windows and wall coverings and air conditioning systems and escalators and lifts, they all think that their own little part of that building is incredibly complicated. They'd all say it's special. You can't just have the Thyssen elevator, it must be the Krupp lift, because the vertical movement systems are much better at Krupp than at Thyssen. And luckily they bought each other, so the companies ended up merging. But at the end of the day, everybody thinks they're special. We need to think, before we even worry about what the components look like, what the actual solutions look like, and there are some fantastic solutions which I saw when I was walking around upstairs here earlier on today. We need to think about how we can win mind space of the actual clients, the people writing our specifications, the people working with our samples, the people playing with our lighting equipment. We need to think how we can win their attention, because the world, unfortunately, is not just composed of people who would say that they're fans of lighting. By pure accident, something to do with the government of the time and the lack of jobs for engineers in 1992, I started in lighting, and I've stuck with it. Every year, whether it was the Hanover Trade Fair or later every 2 years at Light and Building, there are new innovations. There's a revolution in the industry. And I'm sure that as a couple of these flash past, you might actually remember some of these amazing innovations. These are all new things, revolutions with the industry from, let's say, give or take, the last 25 years. Some of them stood the test of time. Some of them, sorry for the small exclamation mark, didn't. Great ideas, super concepts. Anybody who can remember all of these is definitely about as old as me, because there's a cut-off age there at about 30 for people who can or can't remember those. But these were all great ideas at the time. What went wrong? And that's an interesting way of looking at how our market right now is shifting. Complexity, simplicity, and the challenges for our industry today are making everything a little less stable than it used to be. One of the things that we looked at is LEDs. The first LED innovation I ever saw was the Hanover Trade Fair in 1999. That was the first LED desktop luminaire. Had a service life of around 300 hours and a small problem with flames, unintentional flames, which is usually a bad sign for professional lighting systems. Today, LEDs have established themselves as having a market share now in excess of 60%. No other light source in our lives in the industry, no other light source has had that level of market penetration. And say, yeah, but fluorescent. Fluorescent hit about 35% at its peak because there were lots of other things around there as well. We don't expect any real market shift in terms of new technologies realistically for about another 7 to 8 years. So that gives us a reasonably stable platform to work along, simply because production technology isn't moving that way. But have we taken this opportunity of a new, relatively stable technology to actually drive home the innovation which is allowed by that? And that's an interesting question which I tried to look at. So I did a little survey with some engineers and said, so when you're putting a building together, how much do you actually spend on the building? And in a very, very short version of that, roughly 50% of the cost, and I'm sure if you look at buildings like the one straight opposite here, roughly 50% of the cost was the land. And actually pouring concrete and creating slabs and buying bits and pieces of false ceilings and carpets and people to make it all happen, that was roughly a third of the overall cost. The electrical installation, in total, everything, high power, low power, risers, everything around that, about 17%. Leaving light at a slightly depressing 1% of the overall spend, and that was the optimistic figure. Yeah? The bandwidth was somewhere between about 0.4% and 2%. I could say something very rude about different costs of lighting products, but let's just assume that the 1% is a figure which is fair enough. So with 1% of the total spend on a building, how can we actually use that to create something which is a little bit more interesting? Because one of the things that I'm personally working a lot with at the moment is looking at how we can turn the Internet of Things, sorry, somebody has probably already mentioned that today, how we can turn the connectivity and the possibilities around this into something which actually adds value in the market. if we limit our thinking, which unfortunately seems very much to be the case at the moment, to IoT being the next way of controlling a lighting fitting, in terms of dimming or color control or something like that, actually we don't win very much with that. Where's the added value? There have been systems which allow that to be done in existence since about 1994, quite comfortably, and before that, relatively uncomfortably, but still possible way back to the 50s. So those systems exist. Where's the added value? What we're looking for today in the industry, and the urge and a lot of the projects that I get involved with, are how this connection can jump beyond lighting and how the added value can actually exist around that. Hierarchies are dead. Some of you probably work for companies with official organizational charts. Hierarchies exist, of course, they're there. But when we consider how lighting works, when we consider how within our built environment we can actually use lighting and technology to make a difference, then actually we need to think way beyond controlling, but actually with validated and real use cases for adding this. I'll come to that and I'll give you a few crib sheets later on. So, a very famous American IT professor, mathematician, and general whiz kid, sort of a slightly younger version of Einstein, once said, "Fools ignore complexity, pragmatists suffer it, some avoid it, and geniuses remove it." So obviously we want to try and be the geniuses here in the room. And of course, you look at a picture like this and you say, but yeah, that's residential. We're rapidly approaching, for me, a type of shift in the dynamic of our industry, that it's becoming easier for people to control lighting in a residential setting, and also more fun. The user experience, a car has a user experience, an airport has a user experience. The user experience is more exciting. The user experience, though, also hammers home another point, which is when we then talk about how do we build a real value, we will hear and have heard for the last roughly 25 years about human centricism in lighting design. It used to be called biodynamic lighting, and then it was circadian rhythm lighting, and now it's called human-centric. I'm sure in 5 years' time some marketing people will come up with some new terms for it. But actually, I really struggle with the thought that simply changing the color of light in a building is human-centric. That's a definition, we can live with that. But at the same time, I actually look for solutions, and connectivity can deliver these solutions, which really means that the lighting is focused on the people in the space, and not focused in a sense that they have to do something, but also ideally in a way that they don't have to do anything. Sometimes the intelligence of connectivity can deliver solutions which people enjoy, but actually didn't know that existed. Functionalities on the iPhone, or the famous quoted numbers, which I've forgotten, but something like 3% of the functions of Excel are actually used by a normal user. It's the other clever 97% which happen in the background, which sometimes can make our lives easier. And I really believe that this should be a focus for us going forward in terms of how we connect lighting and systems. What could next generation lighting be? Connectivity, voice control, non-physical interfaces. We're very quick to think about people touching switches and panels and apps and all of this. But how about non-physical interfaces? Reactions to gestures, reactions to occupational behavior in a building, reactions to the way people move around a space. Systems which genuinely react. And then, of course, combining those systems into something smart. Voice control, why is it good? Saving time, adding to the experience, stopping people having to actually create so much infrastructure. Non-physical interfaces. We're very good at creating accessible spaces in buildings today for persons with reduced mobility. We're not very good at thinking past that classic stereotype. And some of you might know I do a little bit of work for a couple of airports. One of the main focus groups that we have now is to say there are so many people moving around our spaces today with hidden or invisible restrictions on their mobility that we can also use smart and connected systems to work around that. And of course, contamination reduction is a big issue now as well. Reactive systems, systems which help us work and play better with our buildings, but also maybe systems which in a classroom environment, in professional office environments, systems that react to reduce distraction from that environment. And of course, if lighting can learn how this works and how we can then interface with other buildings, it also means we've got a simpler infrastructure. In the old days, there used to be a difference in the market of decades between someone going from market leader to market follower to bankruptcy. There have been plenty of examples, and we only need to look around the UK newspapers in the last 2 or 3 years, whether it's on the high street, whether it's in technical companies. There have been plenty of examples of companies which have managed to make that transition from being star of the day to yet another filing for bankruptcy in a matter of years. And maybe this will go down to months. Maybe it will go even faster. There's been so many examples now. And for me, we need to be careful that we don't sleepwalk into this issue now, both from a design perspective, an engineering perspective, and also a supply perspective. Can lighting fulfill the role? Sure it can. We've got lighting products everywhere. We've got easy capacity within the products to add components, technology, and I use the term very, very carefully, intelligence to the building. We're covering the whole space. There's lighting everywhere where we need it to create that connected environment, and we also have really easy associations. We know the building and we know light. So, we can do it. No other group of individuals in the built environment has the knowledge of light and its availability through the space that we have. We are all over the place. And look around here, there are so many lighting people here, it's brilliant. New technologies and connectivity can definitely either make lighting an accessory to building management, which means that a lot of the innovation and the cool stuff that we do becomes a lot more difficult, or we can represent a major part in the backbone of building technology. So, I'm about 1.5 minutes over. I'm pretty sure I'm also 1.5 minutes away from your cocktails. I'm pretty sure that we want to be the people driving the industry forward. So, get rid of the hierarchies, play with connectivity, experiment, innovate, and let's see how we can drive lighting forward. Thank you very much.